Hello. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are watching or listening to this exclusive, that's right, exclusive episode of A Coffee with Chris. As always, brought to you in association with our charity partner, Big C, who help local people affected by cancer, and proudly sponsored by Hill Coaching Company, here to help you become a better version of yourself today. Now, let's welcome today's guest. I have managed to get on the show, host of Sky Sports Soccer Saturday, broadcaster, author, speaker, and event host, and all right, I'll admit, my friend, Simon Thomas, the man who has to not celebrate on national TV every week when Norwich City score. Simon, let's kick off with this question. What are the pains and positives that come with running a social media account as a public figure?
I'm going to start off with the positives, Revo, because there are lots, despite what we might read and hear. There are lots of positives to social media. I see it as a real kind of opportunity, a responsibility to be a public figure within the social media space. I don't have to be. There's nowhere written in my Sky contract, for example, that you have to be on social media. There's nowhere written that you have to be a public figure. I could operate it like lots of my friends do, where they're just being followed by people they know. I've taken the decision to be a public figure. I actually do remember not really getting a choice in the world of Twitter back in 2010. So myself and 𝗖𝗵𝗿𝗶𝘀 went out to cover the World Cup in South Africa for Sky Sports News. And they just set us up on Twitter because Twitter was kind of a new thing, big thing, emerging thing back then. And it was very funny because me and Ed, throughout the whole trip to South Africa, were kind of comparing who was building the followers the quickest. And I think because of my Blue Peter background, I got quite a head start on him. But I think when you take the decision to be a public figure, it comes with its pros, it comes with its cons. The big plus for me is it gives me a platform that actually television doesn't give me. On a Saturday when I come on air, I'm there ostensibly to be the kind of conductor of a very busy show that is purely and solely about football. And it's about getting opinion in the build-up, and then it's about covering every game that's happening throughout the afternoon. It's not a platform for me to share my views on mental health or to make a political comment or whatever it might be. That's where social media comes in. And I love the fact that you have that freedom, you know, with the caveat that because you are in a position of responsibility, you are a public figure, you are doing a show on Sky Sports, that you've got to be careful about what you say, what you don't say. But it's an amazing opportunity. So there's the minus side is you are opening avenues for people to gain access to you by being a public figure. When I was on Blue Peter many years ago, it was the pre-social media era. The only way to contact the show to vent your spleen on something you didn't like about a presenter would be via the old style of letter and email. The internet was around back then and not that old, but that was it. I often wonder what the Blue Peter era for myself and people like Matt Baker I work with would have looked like had it been around back then, but it wasn't. And in many ways, I'm quite thankful for that. But what it does do is it opens lots of avenues so that people can contact you directly. They can comment on posts. I know you can turn that off on Instagram if you want to, but you open up a dialogue that you've kind of got to be ready for the rough and the smooth. There's going to be quite a number of people who follow you because they're interested in you. So they're going to say nice things. They're going to be encouraging. But there's, of course, going to be people who aren't going to be so encouraging. So, you know, it's for me, it's a really big positive, but it's how you manage the negatives that ultimately dictate whether social media for you is going to be a good thing or a bad thing.
And we're going to get into those, Simon. It's a cracking start. There's one word I want to kind of pull out of what you've just said there: responsibility. Is that overbearing for you? Because you've got your position, obviously, at Sky Sports, you know, one of, if not the biggest hosting jobs in the country and beyond internationally. And do you often think, oh, blooming heck, like you're going to write a post and you're like, oh no, like what if I say the wrong thing? Like, because what you do, and we'll get onto what you do and how you do, and the whole reason why I wanted you on this podcast later on. But if I was in your shoes, I think I'd be really worried about writing that social media post when so many people are looking at it. Do you feel like that?
Not really, no, because I think if we were forced to have a social media presence because of what we do, there are a number of Sky colleagues I have who just don't like social media at all and are not on it. Their career isn't held back because of that. But it's not a case of this is part of your job. This is part of your role as the 𝗖𝗵𝗄𝗵𝗲 presenter, is that you also need to be posting XYZ on Instagram or XYZ on X. So there's not that responsibility. It's not the pressure to post, which I think is a really tough thing. I often see that amongst influencers, people who are essentially making a living out of their social media presence. I personally would not like to live in a world where I've got to generate content all the time. You know, if I go for a whole week and I've got nothing to say, I find that fine. You know, sometimes you do, let's be honest, you have that, I've got to say something. What am I going to say? Oh, I can't think of anything. Best not to post. So I don't feel that responsibility, which is a really good thing. I think it might be quite different if that was an actual part of your job, as part of your contract with Sky, as well as being 𝗖𝗵𝗄𝗵𝗲 presenter. You need to do, I don't know, 10 football posts per week, couple on the Premier League, whatever it might be. That would bring a responsibility and a pressure. But there's definitely a responsibility in terms of how you use it, what you say, how you say it, what you choose to engage in, what you choose not to engage in. And I felt that yesterday, just for example, and without going massively into this, but the situation in the Middle East at the moment, you know, it's a huge hot topic. It's dividing opinion. I've never seen a subject matter that sparks so many very opposite reactions, and there's so much whataboutery, and it's a really difficult subject to post on. But I just saw those images coming out of that camp that was next to that hospital where people had been essentially set alight. I can't not say anything. And actually all these months ago, everyone's posting about all eyes on Rafa and using that picture that wasn't actually Rafa. And I'm thinking, where are those eyes now? And I did feel that sense of responsibility. How do I say this in a way that is just basically saying that I care about my fellow human beings, whichever side of the fence they sit on, whether they're in Gaza, whether they're in Israel, wherever they are. I care about the sanctity of human life. So I did feel that responsibility, because I thought, I don't want to get caught up in a firestorm here. If I specifically lay the blame at anyone's particular door, then you open up a hornet's nest of opinion and backlash and all those kind of things. And even though I've thought about it really carefully, felt, as you were talking about, that sense of responsibility in terms of how I frame this, I still get messages on DM saying, what about this? I can't believe you've posted this. And I just think, okay, that's the nature of this particular issue, which is probably why a lot of people choose not to post about it anymore, because of the reaction it will cause. But I definitely feel a responsibility to tweet, which I do less these days, but particularly on Instagram, which I much prefer. Yeah, I feel a responsibility to make sure that how I'm representing maybe a subject area, how I'm representing myself, I do think through that before I press post.
It's really fascinating to get that insight from you, Simon. You know, what is it like behind the Simon Thomas screen when you look at it? Because I even feel like this for myself with the obviously much smaller audience that I've built on social. And I think to myself, 𝗄𝗶𝘁𝗵𝗲, I feel like a responsibility now to I need to use this platform for good. And we're going to go on to that later on in the conversation. But anyway, let's leave that alone for now. I have to get into the nitty gritty, Simon. I have to get into the negatives, and it would be disingenuous to get you on a podcast and be like, yippee, everything on social media is happy and wonderful. And actually, probably I'd suspect, Simon, that a lot of the people tuning into this probably want to know what it's like for you when you are on the end of such intense scrutiny, and then that scrutiny gets shared directly or indirectly about you on multiple social media platforms because of your position at Sky Sports. And actually, to be fair, even prior to that, but especially now. And I'd be interested to know off the back of that as well, what are your habits and behaviors that you could share with everyone watching and listening to this today, to help them navigate scrutiny on social media themselves?
Yeah, it's a tough one, this, because it's the really tough part of social media, particularly if you are in a public space, because one of the first things I was ever taught, Chris, when I started on Blue Peter, and it was a really important lesson actually, which you can apply to social media as well, and that is, I remember my editor saying, you are now in a public place. You are doing your job in front of people. There are so many positives that come with this, doing an amazing job that I did for all those years and continue to do now. But by being in a public space, the byproduct of that is you invite opinion, whether you like it or not. People are going to form opinions on you based on what they see on their televisions on a Monday and a Wednesday and a Friday afternoon on Blue Peter. And however good you are, however smooth you might be as a presenter, however faultless you might be, and let's be honest, none of us are, but however you look, whether you're, drop dead gorgeous, whatever, some people won't like the way you look. Some people won't like the way you speak. Some will love the way you speak. Some will hate the way you present. Some will love the way you present. And you have to accept that. And it's a really important lesson, because if you go into broadcasting, if you go into social media and think, I need everyone to love and like me, listen, it's part of who we are as human beings. We want to be loved. We want to be accepted. We want to be revered. But the reality is that's not how the world works. There are going to be people, however good you are. My icon in terms of sports presenting, 𝗖𝗵𝗿𝗶𝘀, the best. Smooth as they come, funny, just a genius at what he did. But there will be people, I have no doubt, because I've seen it on social media when there's an occasional thing up about 𝗖𝗵𝗿𝗶 who don't like him. Yeah. And that's fine, because life is about opinions as well. And I accepted that very early on. And it applies to social media as well. There are just going to be some people who don't like you. So you have to kind of accept that. What's more difficult to accept is the way in which people will express their dislike for you. And that can be really, really hard. And one of the things that I noticed changed most of all in terms of social media was probably in the 2015-16 period. So I'd done the Football League for years at Sky and had the pleasure, as you know, of presenting that famous playoff final with our team, Norwich against Middlesbrough. And then I graduated at Sky to the Premier League. And I remember being quite worried about this in terms of what's this going to look like in terms of the scrutiny level being cranked up, because listen, we both love the Football League, but the Premier League dominates still the media. It dominates the papers. The level of scrutiny, the level of analysis is off the charts when it comes to the Premier League. It's a global thing. So I knew when I got the job on Sky that I'd be in a very different area than I was before. I'm still covering football, but we're in the top league now and the stakes are much higher. And I noticed just after my first couple of games, I think my first one was Hull. Rascal, they'd gone into the Premier League. It was not a great start, but it was kind of a little bit under the radar. But I remember getting on the train that afternoon. It was a Saturday lunchtime game, and just in that comment section on Twitter, as it was then, just seeing so many more comments than there used to be when I covered a Football League game. And I thought, crikey, I'm into a different period here of life, and a different period in terms of what social media life is going to be like. And I think as time went on, Chris, I began to work out ways in which I would manage that, because I do think, and I'm sure we'll talk about this more when it comes to social media, we all have a responsibility in terms of how we use it, because actually, if we use social media responsibly, it can be a real positive. But if we use it irresponsibly, it can really affect us, as we know from the stories we read and what we see, in a really, really bad way. But I felt, look, I'm not going to come off the platform because I value it. I still, X is very different now since Musk took it over, but it's still a very useful platform in terms of seeing what's going on in the world, in terms of seeing what's going on in the world of sport that I follow in football. But it can be febrile. And so what I would do in terms of protecting myself, because I used to think if I come off air and I've had a really good show and everything's gone as well as I could have hoped, I've not slipped over any links, I've asked the right questions, I think we've reflected the game in a fair and balanced way, we haven't swung too far to one side or the other, I don't need my day then ruined by going straight onto Twitter after a game and seeing some oik from somewhere in the UK who, just coming back to what I said earlier about opinions, just doesn't like me and wants to let me know and actually thought we were terribly biased. Why let that ruin my day? Conversely, if I've had a really bad day and things just haven't gone well and I come off there and think, do you know what, I could have been so much better today. I didn't ask that question, but I should have done. I, again, don't need someone online to remind me of the mistakes I already know about. So what I started doing when I did the Premier League is thought, okay, the interest has grown exponentially in terms of people following me, but also people sending comments my way, is I employ the 24-hour rule. So when I finished a game, I would deliberately not look at Twitter for 24 hours because of the things I just said. Do I want to ruin my day further? I've already had a bad day. No. Do I want to ruin what's a really good day? No, I don't. So let's leave it 24 hours and come back to it maybe later. And sometimes I'll look at them. Sometimes I don't. I actually don't look. And I'm sorry if there's anyone watching this who's sent me a really positive comment on X. I do look at them all on Instagram, but I don't on X. I don't look at anything regarding Soccer Saturday. I think because of taking over from Jeff Stelling the season before for this one, and obviously a lot of people didn't want to see him go. I understand that. I thought Jeff was an absolute legend, a genius at what he did, but someone was going to have to take the job, and in the end, I'm very, very fortunate it was me. But there was always going to be that comparison thing. I didn't want to feed the imposter syndrome, so I last season stayed away from looking at anything to do with me on Twitter. Occasionally I'd say to the wife, Dorina, just have a little look. Is anyone saying anything? And she'd say, oh, actually, no, it's quite positive, 1 or 2. I said, that's fine. 1 or 2's fine. But it can be. I'll tell you one story where I think this is where I broke the rule, and I remembered why I had the rule. I was coming back from doing a Prime Video game. So people don't know, I took a break from Sky in 2018, and I started doing some Premier League games again for Prime Video a few years back. And I'd done a game up at Manchester United, done Manchester United Arsenal, and just very, very quickly in the build-up, we were talking about the then Arsenal goalkeeper Aaron Ramsey. He's since gone to Southampton, but he was the up-and-coming goalkeeper at the time in the Premier League, and really the benchmark in terms of where his career was 𝗖𝗵𝗿𝗶𝗀, who was the Chelsea goalkeeper. So we're talking now. This is an easy mistake to make, but I could see how the mistake got misconstrued. We are talking about Aaron Ramsdale, and I threw the question to 𝗖𝗵𝗿𝗶𝗀, and I said, in terms of where Ramsdale is at the moment, Benjamin Mendy he's the benchmark in terms of goalkeepers. I didn't notice I'd said the wrong name, and as anyone might know, Benjamin Mendy played for Man City, and at that time was up on some fairly serious charges, and also happens to be a black player as well. So you can probably begin to see what might then have happened in terms of the world of social media. I had no idea I'd made that mistake, because you're thinking about so many different things, and no one had picked me up on it. I'm not blaming my producer, but they hadn't said anything in my ear. Probably glad they didn't, because an apology can sometimes come out really clumsily, and it makes it all worse. Anyway, as we were coming off air, walking out of the studio at Old Trafford, 𝗖𝗵𝗿𝗶𝗀 just turned around to me, and he just said, you said Benjamin, not Edouard Mendy. And I remember my blood running cold, and that's sick. I was like, oh, because obviously I know exactly what the story is with Benjamin Mendy. And I got in the car that night, and I should have applied this rule that I always apply: do not look at social media. And I was very lucky because Amazon Prime provided a driver, so I was being driven back to Buckinghamshire, where I'm speaking to you from now. So it's about a 3.5-hour trip late at night, and I stupidly went on Twitter. And I couldn't believe that the sort of mentions bubble at the bottom of my feed was into the hundreds. It was 300, 400. I'm like, oh my days. I just took a quick look, and it was vitriol. It was, you are racist. You are just every name under the sun. And I remember thinking as we were traveling, how has it reached this level of kind of abuse? And eventually I found the reason why it had gone so big and viral is I eventually found the source of it, and someone had clipped up the moment and had written at the top of it, this guy calls himself something like, a professional broadcaster. What an absolute disgrace, and gave the reasons why. And I clicked on this guy's profile, and he's a young guy, and I remember it just said in his profile, aspiring young journalist. And I went into a really bad place with it, or I can feel myself mentally spiraling downwards because of what I've chosen to look at that I could have ignored. Listen, I would have had to look at some stuff and probably chat with Amazon about it. But I knew this was an honest mistake. It was just a clumsy mistake that we could all make. It just so happened to be Benjamin Mendy, who was, and they're both black. So people were saying that basically this is, some form of racism. You can't tell them apart. Yeah. But I found this source of it, and I actually messaged him and said, I'd love to have a chat with you at some point. So to cut a long story short, bizarrely, he DM'd me, and I said, give me your number and I'll give you a ring tomorrow. And this is where there's that disconnect, Chris, between what happens online, what happens in the social media space, and what happens when we actually converse like we're doing at the moment. And I rang him the next day. I thought he probably wouldn't pick up the phone, and he did. And the tone of the conversation couldn't be any further apart from what he'd put online the night. I mean, to be fair, he deleted it, but too late. As you know, how social media works. It's too late. And he was just full of humility. He was full of apologies. And I was able to have a really constructive conversation with him where I just said, listen, mate, look, we all make mistakes. you're a young aspiring journalist. You are going to make mistakes. You know, if you make it, when you make it, you will make mistakes. How would you feel if that was you who'd made a mistake last night and I had decided to put your mistake in a public sphere and let it just burn? And he said, yeah, it would be simply horrible. And I think, finishing this off, Chris, is that's what people don't often think about when they send something like that, is they don't think about the guy or the girl who's sat in the back of the car as I was, or sat at home after a day at work and is actually just sat there very normally in a very normal environment, not in the TV studio, just reading through this. There's like kind of a disconnect between you, the person, the actual person, and what they're seeing on their screen. So they're not thinking through, I wonder how this is going to make him feel when he leaves Old Trafford later tonight.
Wow. There's so much that we can go into there, Simon. I've actually been jotting down some notes, actually. I'd like to get your take on my notes as well, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
So first of all, I love your idea of the 24-hour rule. I think that's really good. And I think that's good for business people to listen to hear. I think that's good for individuals, just general usage of social media, because not only are your emotions heightened, the person on the other end's emotions are heightened, the troll, the person giving the abuse, the person that's, you know, highlighting a mistake, etc. So I love the 24-hour rule. So that's a great takeaway for people, Simon. To bring this to the business world, Simon, I think the other thing you said is there's, Dorina, your wife, said to you, yeah, Simon, there's one or two. But then the other side of the seesaw is 250,000 are not saying anything, or they're really happy with the show. And I have to be reminded about that, you know, with my media work, by my wife as well. Yeah, there's you know, one or two negative ones, but hang on a minute, 20,000 people love it. So don't worry about that. Yeah, I think that's important. And then the last two bits I got there, Simon, was you broke your 24-hour rule. Understandably so, and it just highlights the addiction, that we need to see what's going on. Also, it highlights the fact that people need to be disciplined, and this is a key mindset for social media. Whether you're using it for business, whether you're using it for personal usage, you have to be disciplined. And then I love your point about social media and reality. And I have the very similar experience as Simon, where, you know, I've been on the end of abuse or something on social media. I've then messaged them, or I've met them in person, and they are completely different, and they've apologized. So, yeah, your take on my notes.
Well, I think social media, one of the negatives I would say about it is that it's like FOMO on steroids. So there is that fear that I'm going to miss out if I don't scroll, I don't have a look at stuff. I think sometimes you've got to say, well, what actually, if I choose to step away from it for 24 hours, what am I actually missing out on? Probably not a huge amount, nothing that I won't see 24 hours later. And I think people need to be comfortable with doing that sometimes, just saying, do you know what, I'm not going to miss anything major today. You know, if there is something world newsworthy, I'll probably see it via another source. And so I do think that is important to do. And, you know, I just think in terms of, you know, using it responsibly, it's like anything in life. You know, we have lots of decisions to make. You know, one of the decisions we've made with Ethan, who is my 15-year-old son, is for him not to be on social media till he's 16. Now, some people would say, oh, that's anti-social media. You know, you're just anti-Instagram. You're anti, you know, Twitter. You're anti-Facebook. No, we're not. It's because, you know, he's a teenager. His frontal cortex is still developing. There is a reason why in America, although sadly you can buy lots of other things that are even more destructive, there's a reason why you can't drink till you're 21, because that's roughly the age where that whole change that you go through in adolescence, in terms of particularly your brain, is kind of nearing completion. So we just don't think he's at an age. It's not us saying it's all bad. It's just like, we don't think you're at an age where you can make the right decisions and the responsible decisions about what you choose to look at and what you don't. It's not that we don't trust you. It's just that we don't think you're at the right age. So I just think for all of us, we have a responsibility in terms of how we use it. And I think, you know, sometimes it is good just to give a bit of space. You know, if we see something, whether it might be on LinkedIn, someone's disagreed quite strongly with a post we put up, is to have that discipline to go, okay, that's riled me a little bit, but I'm just going to step back. I had one on Instagram the other week. There was a very late Notts County equaliser. And listen, at the end of the show, at 4:45, all the full times are coming in on my video printer. It's literally doing that. And you've got Merce shouting, or Chris Boyd, or whoever it might be, because there's been a late goal in the Premier League. It is impossible. It is impossible, unless nothing is happening, to cover every full time. I missed a very, very late equaliser from Notts County who'd come from 3 down to draw 3-3. Great story. I just have to miss it. And someone sent me a message on Instagram, just a DM, saying, "You messed up today. You know nothing about Notts County's equaliser." And there was that initial temptation just to go. I just went, you know what? It's
just
fine.
Pause, sleep on it. Sleep on it. I love that, Simon.
And I messaged them a couple of days later and I said, "Look, it's a really busy show. Apologies. I'm going to make a real effort to just to mention Notts County a little bit more this week." And I did a little bit, but it was just about being able to say, not respond in anger, but respond with kind of thoughtfulness. Actually, okay, fair point. Here's my response.
Love that. Totally with you. Really interesting, Simon. I want to go to the other side of the fence now, the positives, and the whole reason why I actually got you on this podcast. It's been incredible that we've got to this point without talking about that. One of the many reasons why I admire you, my friend, is the way that you use social media to help others. You are regularly using your platforms to be vulnerable and discuss really sensitive, really important subjects such as grief, sobriety, faith, which can be extremely controversial when you talk about that on social media. Why do you do that? Why are you so vulnerable on social media? And how can others find the strength to use social media like you do? Because off the back of that, I'm sure you're going to say you hear and see some amazing comments, some amazing stories because you've been vulnerable.
Yeah, and this is one of the great powers of social media, because you know this, Chris, through your own journey of losing your mum when you were very young. It's and always annoys me when people say, "Oh, it's so cliche," but it's because it's absolutely true. When we're facing different challenges in life, whatever they might be, there is an incredible power in knowing that I'm facing this in the knowledge that others are facing it, have faced it, and will face it. And social media gives you a unique opportunity to be able to find out for yourself, through the people you follow, through the interactions you have, that actually on this particular subject, I'm not alone. I wasn't a massive user of Instagram till 2017. I was on it, but didn't really use it, didn't actually fully understand it. It just seemed like a nice place to share nice photos, which I think initially it was.
Yeah.
And it still is, but it's changed a lot as a platform. I wouldn't say necessarily for the worse, it's just different. But I began sharing the story of what had happened to my first wife, Gemma, who died very suddenly in 2017. And I just remember just feeling this great sense of connection, like really authentic connection with people, because a guy speaking about grief wasn't something that we would often see. Actually, we don't often see people talking about grief an awful lot. And, I still have times where I think, was I too open? I don't think I was not open enough, but was I too open? But it was an incredible period, obviously very, very hard period of finding a community of people who kind of, you felt like they were journeying with you from a kind of online point of view. They weren't there in the day-to-day. But it was an incredibly positive experience. And I found actually there was a real power in being vulnerable, and actually that it was helping a lot of other people, because they were going, yeah, I feel exactly like that. And actually, I'm going to show this to my other half, who still hasn't dealt with the death of his dad. And, I really wish he could be as open as you are. And it's not putting me on this big pedestal, but just open up these conversations. And, one of the things that I've spoken a lot about and still do, but thankfully over the last few weeks, it's been a lot better, is anxiety, because it's something I've really struggled with in the last few years, and really struggled with it, particularly last season on 𝗖𝗵𝗄𝗵𝗲. I think all the different aspects of taking that job on fed into a lot of the anxiety that I already had. And people sometimes, the most critical comment, actually, I don't really ever get nasty comments on these particular subjects. Grief, maybe a little bit, but not on really mental health. But there are some people who go as far as saying, why do you feel the need to share this? Well, the reason I feel the need to share it is because I've spoken privately, and obviously I can't mention the names, privately to people within my industry, household names who you and the guys watching would know instantly if they popped up on the screen, who have all talked privately to me when I've put stuff up about their own battles with this. You know, it's something that's very, very widespread within the industry I do, because this is an industry that does feed insecurity. There's something, you know, it's not putting broadcasting on a pedestal, because it's really, in the grand scheme of things, not an important job. But where it's quite unique is you are doing your job in front of people, and you watch everybody else doing their jobs in front of people, and you watch that presenter and think, my goodness me, they're miles better than me. I wish I could present like that. Feeds the insecurity. And so with that insecurity comes a lot of anxiety, the anxiety of maybe being freelance, the anxiety of having to deliver every time you go on air, and that fear that if I don't, everybody sees my failure in front of them. And as we were discussing with the Mendy mistake, it goes viral and everybody sees it on an even bigger scale. And so I find, by sharing my story about anxiety, it's not saying, world, look at me, you know, please give me a bigger pat on the back for getting through the next 6 hours, because that's how I was feeling at 10 to 9 this morning. It's actually helping other people to go, do you know what? I thought I was going mad with this. I thought every time I go into work, I feel exactly like Simon does. And I thought I was mad as a box of frogs, but actually, hang on a minute. He's doing that and he's in this position, and yet he's just being totally normal about something that's actually a really big part of my life. And I think that you're not alone. Social media is just a brilliant connection point, because you can curate who you follow. No one forces you to follow anyone on Instagram or Twitter or whatever it might be, but you can curate. Like with the sobriety thing, I ended up following a lot of new accounts that I never had followed before when I took the decision to quit alcohol nearly 3 years ago, because I wanted to almost have this community of support where I could read about other people's experiences of giving up and what happened before, and go, do you know, I recognize that in me. I was that person, and look at where they are now. They're 5 years on. So it can be an incredibly powerful community for sharing some things that are just at the heart of it about being human.
Oh, wow, amazing answer, Simon. And you know, I actually asked you in that question about how do others find the strength to do it, but I'm going to just change that now, having listened to you, which is, I think people need to know why you should be vulnerable online. And it's because of what you said. You know, you could literally save a life. And I can only speak from my personal experience with my much smaller audience than yours, where I've had people, you know, send me Instagram DMs saying, thank you so much for talking about that. I've just lost my mom. I've just lost my dad, or my mental health is really low at the moment. So I think that's a good action for people. You know, try and be vulnerable online. You don't have to say everything, but just know that you can make such a big positive impact on people if you are.
And yeah, and also see vulnerability as a real sign of strength. It really is. It's a quote a friend of mine used in an amazing book he wrote about this, but he talks about, you know, I think particularly, it's not exclusive to men, but it's quite a male trait in this country. When we face tough challenges, we tend to kind of clench our fists, come on, get on with it, be strong, and all those kind of things. And he talked about the unclenching of the fist, daring to be vulnerable, daring to actually say, right now I'm feeling weak. And social media can be quite a scary place to do that, and think, well, I don't want people to see behind the veneer. I want to feel like a strong person. But actually, I'd say it flips it on its head, because actually when you unclench those fists and go, look, this is me right now. I'm not saying, world, look at me, I'm struggling. There are, sadly, from the mental health point of view, there are some who do use it a little bit too much for that. But people who are just going on and just being vulnerable and in influential positions where they can help others and they've got a wide audience, there is something very powerful about just going, this is me right now.
Amazing, Simon. Amazing. I'm very conscious of time, Simon. I really appreciate yours, of course. I guess I'm going to kind of merge two questions together now, because I do want to ask you, like, how can we all use social media for good? We've spoken about vulnerability, and perhaps this kind of leads into one of my final questions, which is like, what kind of 2, 3, 4, whatever, how many, you know, takeaways would you give people in terms of some tangible advice and actions with regards to their habits and behaviors on social media?
Yeah, I mean, it's a brilliant question. I think coming back to something I said earlier, what is great about social media is well, it's a little bit like we can now do. I mean, TV's changed so much since I first started in it, when there were far less channels. We weren't living in the digital TV age, but now we live in the age of kind of curating your own watch list and deciding I'm going to watch that now rather than waiting for another week. There are the occasional series that the BBC or ITV might do where you actually have to wait a whole week, and I quite like that. Bit old school, keeps you on the edge of your seat, but largely we can decide what our viewing habits look like in the evening. One of the great strengths of social media is you can curate what you look at, what you choose to fill your mind and your heart with. And I'd really encourage people to be careful about what they are choosing to follow and the kind of people, the kind of accounts that they are choosing to connect with. And ask yourself the question, is what I'm following here, is it enhancing my life? Is it life affirming, or actually is it life sapping? And I think that's where, coming back to what I was saying earlier about Ethan and his age, I don't feel right now as a 15-year-old he is, because obviously of peer pressure and all those kind of things, he's at an age where he can make those decisions and ends up following the crowd and following accounts that he really shouldn't be following, which is why we keep him off social media for now. It is about coming back to that responsibility thing we were talking about earlier. You know, if you filled your follow list on, say, Instagram with accounts that, you know, might initially have seemed quite attractive, but actually you find that when you put your phone down or you shut the laptop or whatever, actually you feel like your moods drop. They're probably life sapping rather than life enhancing and life giving. So I think I would just say to people, just be really careful about who you follow and why you follow them, but also have some balance in there. I think particularly coming back to what we were saying about football and what we were saying about politics earlier, is I think it's always really healthy to follow different opinions. It's very easy to gravitate towards people who are just saying the kind of things we want to hear. I actually want to hear things I don't want to hear, but understand why people are saying those. You know, politics is a great example. Of course, everyone's on a political spectrum. We have different views on different things, and that's healthy, and that makes a democracy what it is. And we might vehemently disagree with someone, but actually I'm interested to see why you think, you know, slapping VAT on public schools is a good idea, and over here is someone who thinks it's the worst idea ever. Oh, why are they saying that? Okay, they're saying it for that. So I think it's important to have a balance in terms of the kind of opinions you follow. Particularly if you're someone who is quite political, you find it really interesting across current affairs, try and just be balanced. Otherwise you just feed your mind, you feed your heart with just one version of events. That's why, coming back to what we were saying about the Middle East earlier, I try and look at everything. I try and be across as much as I can before I post anything. I want to check that actually there are multiple news stories saying essentially the same thing. There are people like the Red Cross or Amnesty International saying the same thing. So this almost certainly, is near to certain as certain can be, unless you were there in person, has happened, therefore I will post. So that's one thing I would say. I think one of the other big things I would say is, you know, it's basically this. Don't post in haste and end up having to repent at leisure. It's a could be used about getting married too quick. Don't marry in haste. You have to repent at leisure. Just sometimes it's really important, whether you're a public figure or you're not, it applies to all of us. Sometimes there's that need to respond to something really quickly, or we see something funny on the telly. We're like, I really want to share that. You know, someone's just fallen off their chair at the darts. Quickly cut the thing up and get it out there. Sometimes it's really important to step back before you post.
Yeah,
it really is, because you can repent for a long time over something you put out there. The problem is it's out there forevermore. You know, I could pick up my phone now and I could write something on here that would effectively end my career, and I could delete it within seconds of it being put up on social media. The reality is, in those brief few seconds, it will have been screen grabbed. It will be around forevermore. That's the end of my career. I know that's quite that end of the spectrum, but we all know that we leave a footprint online. We leave a social media footprint. You know, we think things have disappeared. We think things have been deleted, but actually someone might have that post up their sleeve. And I often think one of the good ways of approaching it in terms of what we post and how we say it is to try and see the post before we listen. Chris, we're not making this into the Enigma code or anything. It's not really complicated. It's just about saying, okay, would I be happy if we're married, for my wife or my husband to read that? How would they view that? Would I be happy for one of my best mates? How would they read that? Would I be happy putting that in front of my boss at work? Would I still be comfortable? And I think if the answer to any of those is I'm not sure or no, definitely don't post. That we have a responsibility, whether we're public figures or we're not, towards ourselves mainly, Chris. Towards ourselves, because we can do ourselves so much damage. It's an obvious one to say, never, ever post when drunk. It ends really badly. So many footballers have got themselves into trouble because it's late at night. They put something out there. The next morning, they're like, oh my day, did I say that? Yeah, I've taken it down. Too late, mate. It's And the last thing I'd say on social media is kind of been my main thing I've said today, I guess, is we all have to take ownership of it and take responsibility. It's all too easy to just bash social media and say it's just all negative, it's all rubbish, it's all unhelpful, it's doing this, it's affecting lives in this way. But in the same way that if we're going to live healthy, long and good lives, we need to have a responsible attitude towards food. If we load our bodies all the time with the wrong kind of things, we know it's only going to end badly. Now, I'm not equating social media and food as the same thing on an equal platform. Food, we really can't live without. Social media, we can. But it's the same principle. If we keep on filling our minds with things that are unhelpful, if we are an anxious person and we're following accounts that just trigger anxiety, the 24-hour news cycle really does feed into that. So maybe it's time to unfollow some of those news accounts that we see on our feed immediately. We have to take our own personal responsibility. It's all too easy just to blame Meta or blame whoever and say it's your fault. Part of it is on us. Yes, they absolutely need to up their game. They absolutely have to have a greater responsibility towards these platforms and how they can be used and how they can be abused. But ultimately, we are the masters in terms of how we use it and what we load our minds and our hearts with. So, take responsibility. Take a grip on what you're looking at, and actually if it's bringing you down, if it's, as I said earlier, life sapping, there's the unfollow button. If actually that account you really like, but at this time it's not helping, there's the mute button. I love the mute button. So I don't have to worry about the fact they'll go, oh, they've unfollowed me. It's just, I just don't see your stuff because you're on mute. So it's about looking after yourself, like in any area of life. It's about looking after yourself. It's about looking after your mind and your heart. And social media is not exempt from that. And we have a part to play in terms of how we represent ourselves online, but also, more importantly for me, how we choose and what we choose to look and listen to.
So good, Simon. What is your social media diet is a question that I'm now kind of throwing out to our audience watching this. I think it's really important. What's my social media diet? Am I following accounts that I shouldn't be following? And by the way, this goes for businesses as well, by the way. What's your business social media diet? Like, what is your feed full of? Blokes showing off their Porsches or people giving value? And I just want to, we've actually had a couple of live comments, actually. One from the absolutely amazing 𝗖𝗵𝗿𝗲. And I want to get your response to this, Simon, actually. She says, beautiful vulnerability, Simon. Thank you for sharing your story with us and for going first. I'm encouraged that more men will open up and realize they are not alone in how they are feeling when they see people they respect like you. And she's also followed that up with, as I said to Chris, anxiety is the future imagined negatively. It's just an imagined story. What if we change the story? Interesting. Simon, what's your response to Cassandra's feedback there?
Cassandra, there is truth right there. And it is. I mean, anxiety is. I tried to explain this on an Instagram post a few weeks ago. So I think some people, if they haven't really experienced anxiety, just think it's worry. They're two quite different things for me. Worry is you worrying about things that are tangibly true. So it might be how you're going to meet the mortgage payment this month. It might be about something, I don't know, health-wise that's bothering you. There's definitely a pain in the chest. So I'm worried about that. So it's tangible. Anxiety isn't. It's catastrophizing over something that almost certainly won't happen. So that's what I've struggled with in the world of TV the last 6 years, is anxiety. It's that voice saying, this is going to be a disaster at 12 o'clock. It is all going to unfurl and you are going to be a gibbering wreck by 10 to 1. You've got another 5 hours to go. Has that ever happened? No. Have I had seat of the pants moments? Absolutely. Have I had moments I think I really don't know where the show's even going to go next, but that's the joy of Soccer Saturday. It's a bonkers show. But have any of those anxieties ever really come true? No. Which is why it's such a difficult thing to both explain to people, but also to get a grip on, because you've just got this voice saying, this is just going to be a disaster. And yet the rest of you saying, but it isn't. And you come off air on a Saturday evening going, that was absolutely fine. I mean, the great thing is actually probably the last 6 or 7 weeks, my anxiety has really taken a back seat. It's just been so liberating. I'm aware it could come back, but it's rarely over something that's going to happen.
Fantastic, Simon. Do you know as well, just a quick shout out for Cassandra. Something really exciting is coming from Cassandra soon. She's writing a book as we speak around men and around the subject that she's just mentioned there. So make sure you go and connect with Cassandra Andrews on LinkedIn and stay tuned to that. Simon, thank you for coming on today. I am beyond grateful. Just like on your social media posts when you're talking about anxiety, grief, sobriety, faith, the way in which you are vulnerable, it helps so many people, mate. So thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for coming on today. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure, Revo, as always.
I love how people in the business world don't know me as Revo, but now they do. Thank you so much for watching, listening back to A Coffee with Chris. As always, brought to you in association with our charity partner, Big C, and our sponsor, Hill Coaching Company. I will see you this time next week for another episode of A Coffee with Chris. Thank you very much.